Most mysteries don't announce themselves with flashing lights. They sit quietly in databases, tucked into footnotes, filed under unexplained, until someone notices a detail that refuses to behave. We're told the planet is mapped, the past is documented, and anything unusual gets studied until it makes sense. But every so often, something appears that doesn't just challenge what we know. It breaks the usual explanations. What follows are 5 discoveries recorded, observed, and still annoyingly unresolved. In 2012, a geologist reviewing satellite imagery of Antarctica was cross-referencing ice thickness data when something on the screen made her pause. 3 shapes, symmetrical and massive, rising from the frozen plateau near the Ellsworth Mountains. She zoomed in, the angles sharpened. These weren't jagged peaks or random formations. The structures measured hundreds of meters across, their faces aligned with geometric precision. Each one had 4 distinct sides tapering to a point, like pyramids constructed on a scale that dwarfed anything in Egypt or Mexico. Snow had settled in the valleys between them, but the peaks themselves remained exposed, dark rock against white ice, as if they'd been standing long enough to resist burial. Here's what doesn't fit. Natural rock formations shaped by wind and ice erosion don't create 4-sided pyramids with aligned faces. Nunataks, the technical term for mountain peaks protruding through ice sheets, form irregular shapes dictated by fault lines and glacial carving. They fracture, crack, weather into chaos. Yet these structures showed deliberate geometry, the kind that suggests intent rather than accident. It's like finding a perfect cube inside a landslide. An international research team secured funding and began planning an expedition for early 2013. Equipment was prepared. Routes were mapped. Then, with no public explanation, the mission was canceled. No press statement, no follow-up timeline. When researchers began circulating the satellite coordinates online, some users later noticed those sections of Google Earth had been blurred, the once clear pyramid outlines reduced to pixelated smears. Glaciologists argue the formations are simply unusual nunataks, and that erosion patterns can occasionally mimic geometric shapes under specific conditions. But erosion doesn't respect symmetry. It doesn't align 3 separate peaks in formation or carve identical angles on opposite faces. The structures don't just look deliberate. They behave as if they were designed. Beneath the ice, they remain, unmeasured, and still perfectly aligned. A single finger bone, discovered in a Siberian cave in 2008, was small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. The researchers who found it assumed it belonged to a Neanderthal or an early human. But when the DNA was sequenced, the results didn't match anything in the genetic database. The bone belonged to Denisovans, a species that lived around 40,000 years ago. And buried in their genome were adaptations that made no evolutionary sense. Genes optimized for surviving at extreme altitudes, far more sophisticated than those found in modern Tibetan populations who've lived in the Himalayas for thousands of years. And even stranger, genetic sequences linked to prolonged breath-holding and underwater diving, capabilities comparable to marine mammals like seals. The problem isn't that these genes exist. It's that they're fully developed, refined systems that require tens of thousands of generations under consistent environmental pressure to evolve. But the fossil record shows Denisovans lived in caves and forests. There's no evidence they spent time at high altitudes or underwater. It's like finding gills in a desert species, fully functional and inexplicable. Geneticists suggested several explanations. Perhaps the Denisovans interbred with unknown human lineages that carried these traits. Or maybe isolated populations experienced accelerated evolution under extreme conditions we haven't found evidence of yet. Both theories sound plausible until you look at the specificity of the genes. They're not partial adaptations or evolutionary experiments. They work. And they're optimized for environments the Denisovans never inhabited. Follow-up studies launched in 2015 to map the exact mechanisms were quietly discontinued by 2019. Papers went unpublished. Researchers moved to other projects. The genetic sequences remain in databases, functional and unexplained. A blueprint for abilities no cave-dwelling human should possess. When tested in lab models, they activate perfectly, as if waiting to be used. In 1911, two miners working a guano deposit in a Nevada cave noticed something odd embedded in the dried layers. Bones. Large bones. When they cleared away the debris, they uncovered mummified remains that measured between 8 and 10 feet in length. The bodies weren't alone. Red hair, still intact, clung to several skulls. And when a local dentist examined the jaws, he found something even stranger. Double rows of teeth, one set behind the other, fully formed. It wasn't a deformity or mutation. Both rows were complete, functional, as if the anatomy had been designed that way. Newspapers ran the story for years. The San Diego Union published measurements. The New York Times included witness testimony. Photographs circulated showing the remains laid out for examination. This wasn't folklore passed down through generations. It was treated as serious at the time, documented by professionals using the standards of early 20th century archaeology. In 1912, the Smithsonian Institution took possession of the skeletons for study and preservation. They were logged, cataloged, and transported to Washington. And then, they vanished. When researchers requested access in the 1990s, they received a standard response. No such artifacts exist in our collection. Mainstream anthropologists argue the reports were exaggerated, a product of early 20th century sensationalism when newspapers often embellished discoveries to sell copies. Perhaps the remains were misidentified elk bones arranged to look human, or normal-sized skeletons distorted by mummification and measured incorrectly. But the accounts were too consistent. Multiple witnesses described the same features: the height, the red hair, the dental anomaly. Photographs existed, though they've since disappeared from archives. And elk bones don't form human skulls with intact jaws showing double rows of teeth. More troubling, the double tooth structure was examined by a trained dentist who published his findings. That's not a journalist's exaggeration. That's a professional assessment. The strangest part isn't the missing bones. It's the precision of the early reports. Dentists don't mistake tooth structure. Miners don't fabricate exact measurements. Something was pulled from that cave. In 2003, a Romanian military research team was conducting ground-penetrating radar surveys in the Bucegi mountains when the instruments detected something that shouldn't exist beneath solid granite. A massive void, geometrically precise, buried deep below the surface. The chamber measured roughly 50 meters in diameter, its walls smooth and uniform in a way that natural caves never are. But what stopped the researchers wasn't the chamber itself. It was what appeared to be inside it. 3 structures, each roughly table-sized, positioned in a triangular formation. And according to the radar signatures, they were described as projecting images. Initial reports claimed they appeared to be holographic displays. One showed a rotating model of Earth, complete with shifting continental plates and geological layers. Another displayed what looked like spiraling DNA sequences, rotating in three-dimensional space. The third projected star maps, constellations that didn't match the current night sky. The technology, if that's what it was, operated without any visible power source and had apparently been functioning for an indeterminate amount of time. Geologists propose the radar scans misinterpreted mineral deposits. Quartz and limestone formations can create unusual reflections that mimic geometric shapes under certain conditions. Underground water pockets can distort readings. It's possible the holographic displays were simply optical artifacts produced by the scanning equipment itself. But ground-penetrating radar is designed to distinguish between rock and void space. It doesn't fabricate complex geometric chambers or generate phantom images, and teams operating the equipment were experienced professionals, not amateurs misreading data. More troubling, the radar showed consistent returns across multiple scans from different angles. Equipment glitches don't produce the same phantom structure 3 times in a row. Within weeks, the Romanian military sealed the location. International researchers who requested access were denied. Despite media coverage in Romania and scattered reports abroad, not a single peer-reviewed paper has been published on the findings. Deep beneath the mountains, something waits. Mapped once, never visited, and generating radar signatures that still don't make sense. During a 1998 space shuttle mission, astronauts photographed an object drifting in low Earth orbit. It was large, metallic, and shaped unlike any known satellite or piece of debris. The images were clear enough to show surface details: irregular geometry, reflective panels, a structure that didn't match anything launched by NASA, Russia, or any other space agency. Within days, amateur radio operators began reporting unusual signals originating from the object's orbital path. Some claimed to decode repeating mathematical sequences. Others recorded what appeared to be a star map, coordinates pointing to a system roughly 13,000 light-years away. The transmissions were consistent, structured, and unlike standard terrestrial communication protocols. NASA's explanation came quickly. The object was space debris, a thermal blanket that had come loose during a previous shuttle mission. It had been cataloged, tracked, and posed no threat to the station or crew. The signals were Earth-based radio interference, misattributed to the object by operators unfamiliar with orbital mechanics. But in the photographs, it doesn't look like fabric. It looks rigid, structured, something built with edges and surfaces that catch light like metal, not insulation. Thermal blankets don't maintain stable orbits. They tumble, rotate, and degrade quickly in the vacuum of space. They don't emit radio signals or appear in photographs as solid objects with defined geometry. And they certainly don't show up as the same shape across multiple photos taken hours apart. Debris tumbles. This object held position. When researchers requested access to the original high-resolution images for independent analysis, they found the files were no longer available in the public archive. The photographs that remain in circulation are low-resolution, grainy, and inconclusive. Some believe the object is ancient, a satellite placed in orbit by a civilization that existed long before recorded history. Others think it's still operational, broadcasting information in a format we haven't learned to interpret. NASA has never revisited the subject, and above us, something continues its silent path. Photographed once, never explained, still orbiting every 90 minutes. 5 cases, 5 things that exist, yet won't sit still inside the official story. Pyramids locked beneath ice, DNA that functions in ways evolution doesn't explain. Skeletons examined by professionals, then erased from records. Chambers mapped by radar, then sealed without verification. Objects photographed in orbit, then dismissed without analysis. The strangest part isn't the theories. It's how often the physical evidence refuses to behave the way it should. Which object should we investigate next? Leave it in the comments. And if you want more videos like this, a like and a subscription help a lot.